Nice try.
Have you met Gusta?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You too.
Oh, do I know you?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Phil.
There was a different setting. I got an inappropriate response.
So good.
How you doing? Good to see you again. Our lacrosse team won tonight. Varsity won their playoff. She's also supposed to go to ninth grade one. Shaker. Yeah. No problem.
The boys or the girls? The girls? Yeah, JV won too. They did.
No, it's not gonna be bad. They're gonna be
Colony tonight.
good. Good. One sec, Kelly.
We beat Saratoga. Yeah. We got Shaker tomorrow. That's gonna be the hairy one.
Can you check that mic over there, Dan?
I'm in.
Okay, you're good to go.
Everybody ready?
Yes.
I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Education, a study session to order. The board met in executive session at 6 o'clock to discuss the superintendent's evaluation. It's an annual and a contract requirement we have. And we're now in open session. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag's right behind me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So in terms of trivia, I'll just point out that that flag is here in honor of a former board member who's also a graduate of West Point, Jim Trainer. And when he left the board, our way of honoring Jim, because he used to complain about the flag at the back of the room, Congressman Gibson, who Jim had worked with in terms of helping to screen people for appointment to West Point, provided us a flag that was flown over the Capitol. So when we're saying that pledge, we're recognizing that it goes all the way to Washington here. And anyway, welcome to our meeting announcements. We are joined at the table tonight by Gusta Miller, the first write-in candidate in the history of Shenendehowa to be elected to the Board of Education. So Gusta is invited to be at the table with us through the end of June, at which time she will formally join the board at its organizational meeting at the beginning of July. But this will help her in that transition. So we welcome her and congratulate her. We congratulate Bob and Christina, who I don't know how they did it, one vote apart or something on this. Yeah. And everybody's claiming that they gave Bob the vote. To get the one up. Yeah.
It was my husband. He voted for me.
He didn't vote for you. That could be. Yeah. But anyway, congratulations, and we'll talking later tonight about certification of vote. But congratulations to the public as well. The public that is so supportive of what we're doing here, recognizing the service of our two fellow board members, and participating in a process that we've never had to deal with before, the write-in process. And a number of names showed up, but Gusta was the clear winner on that, and so we welcome her and look forward, all of us, to working with her. I look forward to watching what you're doing here, Gusta, from the outside. From afar. Yeah, from afar, yeah. I don't think I've got any other announcements. This is a study session. We're getting at the end of the year. I just mentioned from the board's perspective, we need to get some of those Dr. Scholl's liners for the shoes. We're standing on our feet a lot these days, along with the superintendent at award ceremonies and National Honor Society ceremonies, but it seems like every night we're standing at some stage and shaking hands with a lot of kids as they come through, and it's a wonderful thing, and it's not just the the top of the class kind of thing. It's people who have put a lot of effort in their citizenship, as we honored last night. There's a lot of honor. And this week on Thursday night, we have the biggest award ceremony that we always have is for our senior class, and that's several hours, a lot of standing and a lot of handshaking, and a lot of happy families and a lot of students. So something we all look forward to. That's despite the physical agony sometimes. It's just a wonderful thing to go through, and we invite and families are happy to see these awards made to their children and their friends. So I'd invite anyone who would like to come, let me see, Thursday night, 7 o'clock or 6:30 at High School East Auditorium. That being said, this is a study session. I'm going to go a whole year without remembering to ask people to adopt an agenda, because I've got one more business meeting, two more meetings to go beyond this. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Bob, a second. Christina? All those in favor? The agenda is adopted. This is a study session. They're designed for the purpose of having administrative updates to the board. There's no public comments at the study session. Residents may attend the next scheduled business meeting on June 5th or contact the board via boe@shenet.org with any comments or questions. All questions come into the Office of the Public Information Officer, are shared with the board and or superintendent as appropriate. Policy questions and concerns are typically addressed by the board president. Operational questions and concerns are typically addressed by the superintendent or his designee. And we'll move directly to superintendent comments.
Sure. The one single comment I have is actually related to our soon-to-be new board member. We typically schedule a new board member orientation the first, second week in June. I'm looking at Mrs. Hoffman. She went through it's a whole day, so plan for it. It's a great opportunity not only for you to understand the board policy and governance, but also for you to have the appreciation of the various administrative roles and how those things intersect. So Mrs. Ford will be reaching out to you to arrange that meeting probably at some point this week, after we coordinate our internal calendars to make sure those people are available for that as well. So we're looking forward to that. And again, congratulations to you and certainly to Mrs. Rajat and Mr. Presley for returning to the board. I appreciate it very much. So we have some interesting presentations tonight. The first one is the art presentation, which was actually postponed. And so we have here Mr. Rosella tonight who's going to walk us through that. So as he comes forward, I just want to highlight the other presentation as well. We have been talking for a long time, and Mrs. Wood, Dr. Wood will talk later on once we get to the equity piece in terms of how we look at data and distribution of staff and resources. So it's going to give an insight. The caveat is that right now it's just an insight. It's not an in-depth analysis, certainly not as in-depth as we would want to like to go. The K-12 counseling plan, the board has known that, but there will be some interesting changes. You're aware of the changes because we've been informing you of the changes already in terms of the new legislation. And then some update on high school one-to-one. All these plans have some common themes. They're under construction. Things that are in the process, certainly even art, constantly changing. So I say that to not only to the board, but to the public, because sometimes people come and think that things are absolutely concrete. We're always continuously improving upon what we do, always modifying what we do, and certainly look forward to getting the feedback from the board and certainly from the public when we can as well. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Rosella to introduce the art. Do you need this, Frank, or you want me to do it?
Yeah, we need the presentation.
We're not used to seeing Mr. Roselli without a saxophone in his hand.
Well, I could have arranged that, but more important things to talk about tonight. So, thank you to Dr. Robinson and, of course, to the board for giving me the opportunity to highlight some of the things happening in the music and art program this evening. And I'm sure you'll agree by the end of this that not only are the arts alive and well at Shenendehowa, but I would argue they're thriving. I certainly hope you'll agree with me by the end. What I'd like to do tonight is kind of two-part. First, talk about some overall highlights and maybe some newer things that you may not know about. And then, of course, spend some time acknowledging some of our most advanced and excelled students. Several of them are here tonight. I would ask that at the very end of this presentation, if any of our kids here who have their name up there or who I've called At the very end, we'll invite you up for board acknowledgement. We will end with just a short video, and then we'll have kids come up. And this is the last slide, Dr. Robinson, so I have to go back to you.
No, sorry.
Don't panic that there's 32. I'm going to move fast.
That was a hint.
Okay, so March, every March is Music in Our Schools Month. I just wanted to highlight that every year we send a few performing groups down to the concourse at Albany, and they perform for legislators and lawmakers and anyone else who's in the Capitol at that time. And this year we had 4 groups go, quite an accomplishment. It is sort of a selection process to get entry into that situation. So we had our Tusago 4th and 5th grade chorus and a select chorus with Mr. Lutano, the treble choir with Ms. Musari, and then the ambassadors with Mr. Antonacci and Mrs. Feeney. Throughout the year, music students are eligible to participate in select ensembles. And we've had quite a few of them this year and quite a number of students selected. The very first one on the left, on the right, on that one, is Area All-State, and that is for high school kids who have excelled under the NISMA guideline. And so for the NISMA region, which is a pretty large area around here, these are the Shenendehowa students, 24 of them who were selected to participate in that festival. So that's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty good number. On the other side is the Suburban Council Festival. That is a group that is comprised, obviously, of the Suburban Council component schools. And again, it's the same type of selection process where students submit the desire to participate and then teacher recommendation. And again, highly selective process. 30 proud Shenendehowa students represented on that Suburban Council this year. So those are both really good numbers, and we're certainly proud of it. One of the other areas we talk about is the All-County Festival. And so SWCMEA stands for Saratoga Warren County Music Educators Association. And that group sponsors 3 festivals per year. There's Choral Festival, a band festival, and an orchestra festival. And again, so for the chorus festival, we had 31 kids participate. That's through an application process / teacher recommendation, and the best kids from all the schools in the 2 counties are selected to participate. So again, 31 is a really good number, strong showing for us, and certainly proud of those guys. For the band portion of that, we had 36 Shenendehowa students participate. Again, really solid numbers. It was a great festival. And then for orchestra, and they also throw jazz band on that one, 52 kids. So that's a really high number. And again, really, really good stuff happened with that. And then the 2 most elite festivals this year are the NISMA Festival. That is New York State Band Directors Association. That's a much wider lens, so you have to have really good NISMA scores, be a really good player to get selected for that. And our 2 Shen participants this year were Matt McCann and Amanda Hayes, so congratulations to them. And then last but certainly not least, the All-State Festival. That is from kids across the entire New York State. Most districts are lucky to get 1 student in. Shenendehowa has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 this year. Paroma Lahiri, Brendan Barrow, Megan Clementi, Ann Maruzzi, Cindy Pang, and Caitlin O'Malley. Top musicians. They have to achieve excellence in order to be considered for that festival, which is held in Rochester in the end of November, early December. And they have top-notch conductors from around the country come in for that. And it also, the performances for that are at the end of the annual Music Educators Conference. So not only is it a great experience for kids, but educators around the state involved in music get to see these guys perform. So that is really an outstanding accomplishment, especially at those numbers. So it's fantastic. We've done a number of musicals this year around the district. Here's just a little list. Obviously, Footloose at the high school, Shrek Jr. was happening at the middle school, Once Upon a Mattress at Orange, and I believe that's the first year Orange's had musicals, so congratulations to Mr. Moon for pulling that off. Tusago, Beauty and the Beast, and Orenda, The Music Man. If you had a chance to see any of them, each one of them was outstanding. And what I love about it is it's not just the quality, they get so many kids involved in it that it's unbelievable. So that to me is really good news. And then just a little, did you know Shen students enrolled in music chorus at high school have an average GPA 5 points higher than of students not enrolled in music. I'm going to take that and put it in my music sales pitch when we're talking to fourth graders and fifth graders. This year was the 15th annual Jazz Festival. If you have not seen our Jazz Festival, it's an unbelievable thing. Each year we bring in a guest artist. It's sponsored through Arts and Ed, for Friends of Music. We get a donation from the Suburban Council, Music Directors Association, and we're able to bring in top-notch musicians from around the country to work with our kids. They work with every jazz band in the district for 2 to 3 days. We do master classes. They work with the groups. Kids get to hear phenomenal, high-caliber performing musicians play. And then we put on a show on Thursday night. And then on Friday or Saturday, depending on the year, we invite Suburban Council schools for an invitational. So we connect other Suburban Council jazz ensembles. They come in and work with our director. There's an adjudication process, and it's really pretty phenomenal. And 15 years we've been doing that. This year's guest artist was Michael Rodriguez, and this is just a picture, just if you can imagine if you haven't seen it. At the very end, we bring every kid at Shenendehowa who's in a jazz band and put them on stage. We count to 4 to start the tune, and we say a prayer that it's going to end together because it's not rehearsed, and it is like a wall of sound coming actually into the audience. It is phenomenal. So that's just a quick picture of the 140 kids in our jazz program performing. Pretty outstanding. We've had some guest artists throughout the year. Recently we had the Crane Symphony Orchestra. Those folks came in and performed for our kids. They performed for the community. And then the professors from Crane School of Music came in and worked with our students. We also had Kim Nazarian of New York Voices, legendary vocal jazz group. She came and did some workshops with some kids. Again, much of this is sponsored through either donation through our Friends of Music or through Arts and Ed. So we're doing some outreach to get pros in here to work with our kids, and it's been really effective. And then our NISBA competitions, 147 students participated in the NISBA Piano Festival that was held in St. Rose in March. 147 Shenendehowa kids. 450 roughly band, chorus, and orchestra kids from grades 6 through 8 will participate or have already participated. I think that's first weekend of June is the next festival. Shenendehowa will be hosting one of those festivals next year. Wish us luck in that because it's a lot of work to undertake, but we're excited about it. And under the guise of NISMA, you can go as an individual and perform a solo, or you can bring a group. And this is fared for mostly a cappella, which is our top choral group. And they performed on the highest level, level 6, and received the highest score of gold. So outstanding and good work to them. And then I could have probably went on for 3 hours about this, but I just tried to give you a snapshot of music in the community. My teachers are out there with kids. They're trying to give them performance opportunities and get them to the point where they appreciate not only playing for themselves, but the art of performance and how important that is. So we were at the Clifton Park Center Mall. The high school wind ensemble went to some elementary schools to work with kids. And we do something every year at the library with the jazz groups. I am sure I've missed about 90 of those, but I also think you don't want me to list all of them for you. And then last but certainly not least with music, the NAN Foundation every year puts out a survey, which we participated in. And it goes through a litany of questions about the district size and the district support for the arts, the funding, so on and so forth. And for the second consecutive year, Shenendehowa was nominated Best Community for Music Education. So I believe, maybe I'm biased, but that is a well-deserved nomination. And music's doing great right now. I would like to turn it over to Mrs. Wheeler, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the Olympics of the Visual Arts.
Hey, Frank, one quick question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you seen a growth? Are we staying static? Do you see, what's the fluctuation?
In numbers,
Yeah.
overall enrollment numbers, up.
Oh, great.
It varies by grade, and it is very proportionate with the population. So in a year where we know the class size is smaller, we'll see a little bit of a dip. But overall, from about 07, 08, proportionately, we are higher. And so again, if you look at that in chunks, sometimes you'll see a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but proportionately, the percentages are up.
Do you think some of that too is how you promote it more and getting the word out on the programs
Yeah,
and other
absolutely.
kids seeing the success of the students that are in the
I think
programs?
that's it. I think it's the
Okay.
success, and honestly, I think it's the team and the fact that the teachers are making it attractive for kids and getting them hooked on it. And once you get that buy-in, if you're successful, kids don't want to leave the program.
That's great.
So,
Wonderful. Well done.
of the visual arts. This is a competition that's actually been going on for over 30 years. But about 3 years ago, Shen Middle School decided that they would get involved. It is run as an extracurricular activity. The first 2 years we did it. The kids did a really nice job, but I think they were a little disappointed because they didn't place. They didn't come home with any awards. This year we had over 35 students participate in it. It is an amazing competition. The students are given visual problems to solve in different media. So they can get involved in photography, drawing and painting, sculpture. There's a number of different media they can volunteer to be part of. And then they work as a group to come up with a solution to the problem. And it takes them the whole year to come up with this solution. And then in April, we have the competition at the Saratoga Civic Center. So this year, our team did very well. These are some of the kids that participated. Our sculpture team won first place. One of the neat things that's going on while the judges are judging is they are given a spontaneous problem. So they have to bring a box of supplies and they have to actually create a work of art working together, sitting in a very uncomfortable position on the floor and making some artwork. Our illustration team won first place. Our photography team won second place. And our architecture team won second place also. So these are all 7th and 8th graders. It is a tri-building club. There's a lot that goes on during this club. There's a lot of team building, but they don't always agree on things, and so they have to come up with these solutions to creating the art. The drawing team won second place. We really walked away with a lot of awards this year. The kids felt really good. We also compete in, not compete, we also display work in the Capital Region BOCES show at the State Museum. This is the legislative show. The Empire State Plaza has a collection of art, and our students are inspired by one of the artists who has work on permanent display at the museum, and then they have to create a work of art based on that artwork. And so each year, each art teacher is asked to submit a work of art for this show, and it's held during the same month as the music. So it's a march celebration of the arts, and it usually goes on during the day. So I've never had a chance to go there, but if you go there, I understand that you can have your picture taken next to one of our state legislators. Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Wheeler.
Thank you. That's awesome.
So recently we adopted a chapter of Art Honor Society, and just a few days ago we had our induction. We inducted 20 new members, which is fantastic. We're sending off 30 graduating seniors, again really highlighting our high-level art kids and their talent. And on the bottom, I don't know if you can see it, but it's just a little snapshot of the AP scores from the AP Studio and Art course, and you can see consistent growth, not only at Shenendehowa, but across the state, generally speaking. But what's more impressive is that we are consistently well above the mean, and our kids are doing really well on that. So kudos to Mr. Murray and the entire team who prep kids and get them ready for it. So that's outstanding as well. And I would like to turn it over to Mrs. David, who is going to talk a little bit more about some of the high school shows.
Good evening. Hi.
Hello.
I teach at the high school, and the students are able to participate in a number of shows. So I won't read all these names, but we had several students selected at the All-Star Show, and that's held at the Saratoga Art Center. Gets a lot of exposure. At the 3D, the Capital District Art Supervisors Show, these were students that, this was a juried show. Alexis Grigor, Grace Corliss, Tyler Freiberg, Stephanie Lawrence, Katie Kelly, Sean Bolger, Brianna Brackett, Rachel Grassa, and Kaylee Clark all participated in various three-dimensional works of art. Then the high school regional show was also a juried show, and these 4 students, Sean Bolger, Isabel Rodriguez, Megan Ress, and Kaylee Park, again, were juried into this show, and this has a lot of exposure in the south of part of Shenendehowa, Albany, Colony, Shaker, a lot of schools in that area. The Art Media Fest, Shen did phenomenal at this program. This was held at, I believe it was in Bethlehem this year. Jesse Alsdorf, Renee Bourgeois, Eliza Branch, Parker Derrick, Hannah Franklin, Morgan Hughes, Samantha Jacobson, Alex Goldbrook, Caitlin Livingston, Lauren Mundiger, Kaylee Park, Cassidy Pettit, Dan Shapiro, Harrison Shaw, Caitlin Scola, and Dominic Brumbo. We're all participants, and there's quite a few students locally that participate, and we did phenomenal at this. The winners, Kaylee Park won Best Animation for a short film she made called When Two Worlds Meet. Eliza Branch won honorable mention for her graphic design, and Morgan Hughes won first place for still life photography. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of competition in media arts. This is a very popular program. The High Jury Show, we had several finalists, semifinalists, Amy Palazzo Chiavo, Emma Gray, Dorothy Lee, Sophie Meyer, Cindy Payne, Matt Van Dusen, and Matthew Vigilante were all semifinalists. That show is more north of Saratoga, so Queensbury, Boston Spa, close to the north. And one of my students, Emma, was one of the top 100 selected out of well over 1,000 students. Oh, and right now on display is our art show, and hopefully you have a chance to make it over to the Half Moon Baseball Complex, where it's just display after display is so impressive and heartfelt, especially from the little guys.
So the closing reception on the art show is tomorrow night. So if you haven't been there yet and you want to catch it, I suggest getting there by 5:30 tomorrow to see what's going on there. These are just some samples. But, sorry. If you can imagine what the room looks like before we walk in there, it's concrete floor, and there's nothing but those cafeteria tables in the back. And so the day before everybody sets up, our grounds crew delivers our art panels. We spend a few hours putting them together and getting them set up, and then the art teachers come in with bags and boxes of work and set it up. This year, 1,916 individual works of art. So almost every student at Shenendehowa, every student at Shenendehowa, 1st through 5th grade, is enrolled in art. Every 6th grader touches art at least once during the year. Every 7th grade student is in art. We don't have 8th grade art at the moment, other than some select classes. And then our enrollments at high school are slowly on the increase and have been pretty solid all along. So we're a growing program, thriving. Before I invite the students up, I thought if this link works, and we have sound. Let's see if I can play this video for you. So it's 1 minute long. But this is Kaylee Park's entry, which won at the Media Fest.
I don't know, Frank. Buffering.
We'll give it about 3 seconds, and if it doesn't work, we'll come up with plan B.
Is Mr. McDermott here?
Okay, so you'll trust me, it's a great video. We'll find a way to give you folks access to it.
We have it. It was distributed to us with our Friday packet.
I forgot I planned that, Mr. Casey. Thank you
Yes,
for your help.
yes, you were good, you were good, Frank, you were good.
Okay, so with that said, thank you for your time and attention tonight. Please forgive me if I sneak out. I do have to go lock up the art show tonight.
Important
8
thing,
o'clock, I gotta
important
keep an
thing.
eye on the time. And I would love to have our students in the audience tonight who are acknowledged tonight to come on up and be publicly acknowledged. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys, outstanding job.
Frank, I want to make a comment across the board on the arts. This is half bragging and half reality. So my daughter, my youngest daughter, went to Shen through the 10th grade, because of some social issues, she ended up leaving here. But and she's now I used to say starving artist. My wife corrected it and said striving artist, and now she's a producing artist. The importance of having this recognition on a statewide basis carries so much credential-wise. So when she went out we went to art schools looking where to go college-wise. I was nervous because the school that she ended up with, a small parochial school, had what could best be described for their resources as an arts and crafts program after being here. But it didn't matter because people looked at her resume and her portfolio and said, oh, you're at Shenendehowa, Mrs. Battistoni, and they started naming the teachers, and they knew the program here. It had a credential. And I know the same thing on the music program. It has sway with it. It's important to people on the outside. And I say, to the students here who are doing this, and as a parent, I'm thinking, okay, art's great, but, what are we going to do for a job, after you get out? Well, I was glad to find out that this year my daughter paid taxes, and the IRS hasn't come after her because she had a year's earning that was almost $100,000 in painting. And house painters don't get that, and she's doing this contemporary kind of thing. But it's all based on the excitement. That was the thing that turned her on here, and it has a lifetime impact. And I know it does for, I see one of the names up there, Jack Marshall. Jack Marshall's a graduate here, hired back into our program doing elementary orchestra work and teaching. Lifetime impact on people. And it's so Frank, I just want to make sure that you share with the staff that we know and appreciate the work that's done. This is the kind of investment that when times get tough, people ask, why are you doing it? Look at these areas. And it carries great weight. And given the fact that we have almost 10,000 students here, all of them with different interests, this is important to an element that we see. And when you hear the numbers of students who are participating, it shows the strength of this program. So on behalf of the board, I just want you to express to your staff our appreciation. And there's real promise out there with what we're
Bill,
doing.
may I make, sorry,
Yes.
go ahead, and then I have a comment after.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Okay. Well, just talking about what it exposes our students to, and another personal story, so bear with me, but my oldest son, who's just finished up his sophomore year in college, he took graphic design programs here. He was never the artist in the family. Actually, one of his siblings seemed to be, but he took the graphic arts program or courses here, and he really enjoyed it. But he's like, oh, that was nice, but never thought more about it. In college, he's studying sports management, but then decided to double major now, and he's doing marketing communications, but with a concentration in graphic design, because he actually missed that as a creative outlet. And with that said, he's been encouraged by the marketing clubs that's not even his school. He's not in the school business to do all their graphic designs. And then was out of all the colleges in Boston area, his design was selected to be submitted to Nesson, because they're looking at student, but just he credited Shen for that. He's like, Mom, I never had an interest. Then I took it. It's like I dabbled, but realized, he's making that into a career down the road as well. And you don't realize, I think, till you're older, when you're not involved in it as much, how much that has inspired our students to continue on, even in a professional world in life. So just kudos again to all of our teachers that encourage kids that may not even thought of that as a possibility or potential, to see that coming to life, and that's really impressive, and I was glad that, thank you.
Margaret, I'm going to move this down. We changed things around, and she would have a microphone in front of her normally.
I'm loud enough, it's fine. I just wanted to say, coming from a student perspective, I'm not really sure I could say this better than Mr. Casey because he said it so well, but I take photography personally. My piece is actually in the art show, which I haven't even gone to see because, school's been crazy, but just coming from someone who takes a lot of academic heavy courses and puts a lot of time, having an art class at the end of my day, especially, I love it, it's ninth period, it's really necessary for me because it's something where I don't really have to like work about how to do it a certain way, because no matter what way I do it, it's going to come out the way I wanted it to. Maybe sometimes I have to work a little more at it, but no matter what, it's still probably better for me to have an art class than even like a study hall, because it's something where my work is more free and the teachers are really good. I love my teacher, she's great. So I just want to say, coming from the student perspective, that the fact that we have a school that champions the arts so well, and music, I love music, so, and arts and music is a really nice thing, and that a lot of us appreciate it a lot.
Well, thank you, sir. So, Dr. Wood, how are you going to follow that?
I wish I could say this was going to be half as interesting as that, really.
You were the maestro 2 months ago.
Yeah, you were the maestro. I yield that title to every musician in the house this evening. So this actually began as a project. Let me start by saying we have always followed and believed that we assign staffing based on where the need is across the district. And we have a number of indicators we've used over time to work on this staffing assignment. However, at certain points you stop and think, is there another way we could be self-checking? Is there another look we could be taking internally at our system to determine, when we say this, is that actually how it shakes out in terms of different looks at our system from different views? About the same time we were having some of those conversations, we started watching what was happening with ESSA, which is the updated No Child Left Behind. There's a lot of talk, and still yet to be formally defined, about the need within ESSA for school districts to be looking at spending building by building. So we thought, well, that would be an interesting look. However, I think we're in a position, and hopefully we can do this, to advocate beyond Shen, that just looking at spending doesn't necessarily tell you a full picture, because where you have schools where you have more veteran staff, it could artificially inflate what your staffing allocation is and that teacher to student ratio. So after multiple looks, and I would say this has been an ongoing project over multiple months with Mr. Amelia, Mrs. Mila, Dr. Robinson, and I sitting and looking at how can we best look at this data. So you're seeing what I will say is the first finished iteration, and yet I will stand here tonight and say, when we look at this next time, these are some of the adjustments we need to be making. So it's a first iteration after months of trying to pull something together that looks like how we allocate staffing across the district. So this first slide speaks to total enrollment by school, and so when you're looking over to the most left-hand column, that is total enrollment, student enrollment by school. The middle column is the total number of core teachers. To really do the learning that we had along the way, if you're really going to do an apples-to-apples comparison, you need to figure out which teachers you're including. And at the elementary, it makes most sense to look at our homeroom teachers or our elementary classroom teachers. At the secondary level, then, in order to have our best comparison, we looked specifically at English, social studies, science, and math. However, we know there are many other teachers in all schools. So at the third column, in the furthest right, is the resulting student-teacher to student ratio as a result of just looking at enrollment and just looking at what we're defining as core teachers. On this next slide, we add in free and reduced lunch. So in the second column over, those are total numbers of students receiving free and reduced lunch in each of the schools, followed by the percentage of students receiving free and reduced lunch in that school. So all we've introduced into this look at the data is the addition of the free and reduced lunch information. Why did we add that? Because we thought it was an important indicator for us to keep under consideration as we were looking from an equity stance, recognizing that not in all cases, but in some cases where you have higher levels of poverty, it is an indication of increased student needs for some students. The next
iteration. You'll see this in larger print versions on the next couple of slides. This is another view of our student enrollment relative to core teachers. So it is the percent of the whole district. And I know this is all schools, so I'm sure it's hard to discern exactly. But the blue lines represent the percent of the total school enrollment, student enrollment across the entire district. So if you take, sure. So in Orangen, if you look at, we always say we have 9,800 students. I think the total here was, I guess we can call it the exact total. So we're right about 9,800 students. Of those 9,800 students, 7.13% of them are in Orangen. Similarly, 7.68% of our core teachers, out of the 100% of the core teachers we looked at, are at Orangen. The goal when you look at this chart is to see relative parity between the blue line, which is percent of student enrollment across the district, and the orange line, which is percent of core teachers. The good news, after we went through multiple sorts of data pulling from multiple systems into one, we find that there really is relative parity in most cases across the district. We can take another look and a closer look, just looking at the elementary schools. This is just the elementary schools with along the bottom being the grand total, which is the 100%. So here is, I'll say Orangen, if we continue to use Orangen as the example, in this case where we just look at the 8 elementary schools, Orangen has 16.4% of the enrollment and 16.01% of the core teachers. So again, looking at how are we doing with enrollment versus assignment of core teachers. The next view, we look at the middle school, just the middle school alone. Followed by the middle school where we add in high school. And you may say, why do we do that? Because if we show the high school alone, it's just 2 bars of 100%. So if we didn't have a relative measure in there with the middle school, so we'll call it our secondary view. It's our middle school, high school view. And again, relatively good news here in terms of student enrollment to allocation of core teachers. I can't not share that there's some noise in these numbers. Like when I say noise, it's not exact. And let me give you an example of something that's not exact. If I were going to make a determination to give additional staff, say to Acadia, or Dr. Robinson and I had the conversation based on the blue line being longer than the orange line, I would get into that deeper, and here's why. We have tri-building sections. Critical inquiry are tri-building sections. Algebra, tri-building sections. Double accelerated geometry, tri-building sections. If those are currently covered by a teacher whose home school is Acadia, that section will be assigned to Acadia, even though they're teaching students from all 3. And that's what I mean when there's noise in the numbers. And we know that going through, and we worked hours and hours to try to isolate as much as possible, and we got it about as good as we could get it on our first formal iteration. The next view is a look at our related service providers and nurses by elementary schools only. You'll see we pretty much have one consistent related service provider for, when we say related service provider, librarian, school counselor, school nurse, school psychologist, social worker, and in many cases we have 2 speech teachers in the elementary schools. So it's relatively consistent across the elementary schools. When you get to related service providers at the secondary level, you'll see a few changes, but here we also have high school east and high school west.
Elizabeth, can you go back to that slide prior to that? Just a comment on it because the board and the public just recently approved the budget. While we look at, say, for instance, Iran is going to happen to be the A, but happen to be what I'm talking about, while we look at 111 and we say, okay, it's even across, we sometimes know that equal doesn't necessarily mean equitable. And in this case, in Orangen, we'll be adding some additional psychologist services as a result of the difference in population. So I share that with the board because we're not just simply stopping at this point and not looking further in terms of what the actual data means. Just gives us another view of the data point. So just kind of point out, particularly since we just made that decision in this past budget.
Exactly.
Kind of picks up on the title of this on the agenda, equity and spending. Service follows need, right? So the need is not as predictable as the numbers would indicate, right?
Exactly. And getting into additional nuances to the data, even the speech teachers, they're not all fully 2.0 in each school. It depends. A sister school that has greater need, that second speech teacher may be traveling over to address that greater need. So it gets hard to get really granular, and we're going to continue to see that pattern as we continue to move through the data. So related service providers and nurses at the secondary level, you'll see like at high school east, a total number of 9 counselors, which that's right. So, and you'll see that number shifts as the enrollment increases for certain related service provider positions. Okay. The next view is looking at students with special needs, students with IEPs that are served in their home elementary school. In other words, they're not in a district program. So this
Can you
view...
define district program a little bit more?
Sure. Students with highly specialized needs, in some cases, we are able to create a common cohort for those programs across the district, in which case students would leave their home school, unless their home school happened to be where that district program was located, although we would still count them as being part of the district program. They would then move to that district program where they could get a service that is more tailored to their individual need. A few of I can actually tell you the names of some of the programs when we get to the slide where we talk about district programs. But in terms of students who have special learning needs who are in their home school, Oranjan right now, and let me point out, this data was pulled 2 months ago. So the numbers change literally every day somewhere in this chart. So Oranjan has 49 total students with 4 full-time special education teachers, yielding a student-to-teacher ratio of 12.25. And you'll see that same progression of numbers as you move across the chart for each school. I will point out that we have shared support staff across schools. So, for example, I was talking with the principal of Scano today, who was pointing out that the allocation of the special education teacher at Scano right now is a little bit less than what is shown there, because more of that is either in the sister school to Sago or servicing AIS in the school. So there are some additional nuances to some of this data, but that change creates a slightly larger student-to-teacher ratio in that particular school as of today.
Just before you go on, can you point out the more significant, because if you were just to look at the last column, I think you would totally misread the data, because Scano, for example, may have 19 kids, but they could be spread across 5 grade levels. And so what you're going to say, you're not going to service certain kids because it's only 19 of them. So staff distribution also impacts staff ratio. And I think those things, so if you want to just talk about that.
No, that's such a great point. Just because you only have 4 students with that need at a certain grade level doesn't mean that they don't get served, right? They still need service provision of some sort. So there's still a staffing demand where you have fewer numbers. It's very hard to say that it would ever be, particularly where we're talking in relatively small numbers overall, it's hard to have an exact ratio, because we could never say we'll have only 10 students with special needs at every grade level. That number varies based on the needs of the individual students that are moving through that school. So we do sit and talk, and we look through when staffing allocations occur, how many students are there, but it's also how many students are at every grade level, and where does it make sense to have some of those students grouped together in terms of their instruction, or where do they really need a separate or individualized service? And again, this accounts for this year. One of the schools up here that looks like it has a higher staff to student ratio is actually getting additional staffing next year. And you could say, well, would you do that with everybody? It really depends on what the needs of the students are. Where you have more students with IEPs in grade 5 that are moving on, you wouldn't necessarily follow suit. So there are just so many there's a lot of additional investigation that goes on prior to drawing conclusions from what you see at a first pass. In terms of district programs, again, keeping with the theme of Oranjan being on top, Oranjan has 26 students as of, I believe that was as of the March date, that are in the BESD program at Oranjan, with 3 special education teachers allocated. So if you're following me across the top, there are 3 special education teachers that are allocated to that program. There are 13 aides. This is the first slide where we've introduced support aides, but it's because aides are so vital to the success of these district special education programs. And then the resulting student-teacher ratio on the very far right side includes teachers and aides. So that's the first time, again, that we factored in aides in our look at the data. Octay also has the FSD programs. They have 18 students in that program. Chattacon has another strand of the FSD program at 20 to 21 students, again, as of the March date. Scano has the kindergarten skills development program, and you'll notice that that has a higher resulting student-to-teacher ratio. That is a less intense service. So those are students just coming into kindergarten. They've often come in with supports from their preschool, and when we take a look at what they benefit from special education services in kindergarten, they go into the KSC, and then many of those students actually return to their home school for the first grade program. And then Tasago, you see, and you're well aware of the MOVE program being located in Tasago, as 2 strands of the Connections program, or 1 strand, that is 3 strands of the Connections program. Thank you, that's why you're here, Michelle. Keep me on track, including the number of teachers and aides.
So, Bob, can you just go back to that one slide prior to, I think it's an important point for the board, why this data becomes important. So what doesn't exist is a magical baseline number out there that says the typical school program is X, because every kid's situation is different, distribution is different across grade levels, and so all those things impact staffing ratio. And while that's the case, one of the things that's not here and it's difficult to do is juxtapose performance on this. And the reason I'm pointing this out because Elizabeth's going to talk about AIS staff in a little bit, and we look at AIS distribution of staffing a little bit different. It's not necessarily about the numbers, but we look at a performance factor more so in the AIS distribution. Special ed law is defined by IEP's programming, and so those kind of things happen outside of the looking at the performance data completely. But this is just an important point for the board to know that now having this information, what it causes us to do is pause and ask those questions and say, okay, we don't have a baseline to compare it to. Can you compare a district baseline because it's based upon happening to what grade level kids are in, but what does this actually mean in terms of truly capacity to provide a high quality program to all kids? So the data lends to more questions, which is what we want, because we always want to be in a mode of questioning what we're doing versus being satisfied with what we're doing and not looking at the information again. So to ensure, back to Mr. Casey pointed out, that service is in fact following these. So every year we're asking ourselves those questions, and so that's what the data is showing us. And so if you look at Oranjan, in this scenario is 12.25. Turn the page real quick, Bob. In the next scenario is 1.63, but we know that's a highly staff-intensive program. If we were to come in here and tell you that it's a highly staff-intensive program, but we don't have the staff for it, then we have a problem. So someone may look at that and say, oh my God, for every 1.63 kids you have an adult? Well, yes, the program requires that kind of staff intensity. And so that's always the rub when we try to do these comparisons. It's not a straight line analysis at all.
And as we move into the AIS becomes more complex. And if
Can you explain what AIS means?
yes, academic intervention services. So these are students who, according to the state definition, are in danger of falling below benchmark or possibly not being able to graduate based on their current relative performance. That's the state's broad definition. All the way through our system, we have established what we consider to be grade level standards, and where students are struggling to reach that grade level standard, we provide some additional supports in many cases to help them work toward that grade level standard. When we looked at this so many different ways in terms of how to display this information, I think the most important point is that there are not, if you look at the Orangen number, there are not 302 unique students at Orangen right now receiving AIS. There are 302 combined students between ELA and math. And so quite a few students are duplicated. But just showing a combined number would not help address the staffing conversation, the equity conversation that we're having here, because those are provided as very different services. So you can't lump them together and then talk about staffing. They really need to be looked at individually. But what I don't want anybody to do is to think, wow, nearly half of the students in one of our schools is receiving academic intervention
Same thing would be for
support.
Chango, it'd be more than half if that's the case.
Exactly.
Well, an important part of that with AIS specifically is that there's different levels. So you can be an AIS and all you're doing is being monitored,
Absolutely.
or
Right.
you can be AIS and actually have hands-on special classes, which takes more attention.
Absolutely. And that is a great point, and that's an added layer that we have to look at when allocating staff. Another, and I would say, let me point out too, that the Chisago number appears very low. In conversation with the building principal today, our conversation is that it's probably more like 75 students, but we need to do a little reconciling with when we do our data pull out of the system, why is that number coming up as different than what's reported? So again, like I was saying, it's our first finalized iteration that leads us to our next level of investigation and conversation. I would also say if I were to do the AIS again, I might look at this, but more important, and how AIS staffing is allocated, we use common assessment data that all students in all schools take. And we look at the percentage of students who are performing below benchmark to allocate staff. And a brief explanation of why we do that. You could be allocating staffing based on decisions that were made where some families don't want additional AIS support, but the student should really qualify, and you want to be able to have staffing there to follow suit. Conversely, you have a student who is right above benchmark, but has a number of other factors going on, right? And that student may really need, for a host of reasons, a little added support occasionally. If you just go with who is currently in the system being served, you can incorrectly allocate staffing. So I think the next time I was to show this publicly, I would take that view of it, which is actually the data we use when allocating staffing to schools, if that, hope that makes sense. And then our final look at the data this evening is our secondary AIS. And you'll notice, I hope what stands out to you is the red bars at each of the secondary level, so all the middle schools and the high school west and high school east, and those are our numbers of students receiving AIS in math. That is because we consider all the with lab courses to be a preventative AIS service. So if you are taking algebra with lab, which is a great course, and those students go on and they do very well and successful, but it's a preventative AIS because those students get 1.5 course time. They get half again as much contact time with their teachers. Same with geometry with lab, same with algebra 2 with lab. So those numbers look high. We don't have those as standalone AIS sections, but they truly are an AIS delivery model that we use, and it requires additional staffing, which I think is very well, it provides great service to our students and families.
So Elizabeth, for Augusta's sake, will you just give just a brief history on the lab thing? Because that was a change a couple years ago, right?
It was.
From an understanding perspective.
It was. After a lot of research in terms of what supports help students be most successful, giving additional time in the current school year leads to the highest levels based on a lot of external research and internal success stories as well. So students will have their regular period 1, hypothetically, algebra class, and then every other day they'll stay with their teacher period 2. And it really, it's interesting, if you talk to the math academic administrator, she'll say, she gets a lot of phone calls the first week or so of school with certain students wanting out. And she says, please give it time. Particularly in a course like geometry, which has increased in rigor significantly in the last 5 years. Algebra 2, very complex course. Within about 2 weeks to a month, those students are recognizing the gift that they have been given of the additional time with their teacher to work on the coursework.
Thank you.
In addition to the additional time, is there also a modification of the approach? Because sometimes more time is sufficient, but other times doing the same thing, just more of it, doesn't really help.
Yes, it's not just a slowed down version of the same instruction. Very often it is, you're working in groups on the day 2, which there's a lot of research to support student group work in math, and then the teacher is there checking in with students, but it's really important not to over-support students in math, to be there as a resource, because the students who end up being most successful in math are the ones who are willing to engage in productive struggle the longest.
Second question, if I understood you correctly, did you say that the benchmark for AIS was an internal number?
Yes, because it is not, we don't solely use New York State assessment data.
We use it as a part of, New York State as a part of it.
It's one factor, but we are able to get a much more comprehensive look at students by using multiple internal assessments that we use in addition to.
And I assume that perhaps our benchmark would allow us to address the needs of more students rather than fewer.
Yeah.
It does. Based on what national data would recommend, we serve on the higher side of that in terms of proportionally speaking, but we think that sets our students well for what's ahead.
It's a lot of data.
Yeah, it is
It's a lot of data.
This wasn't part of our packet, right? This.
No, because
see that, 'cause that's a
we
lot
just
of
cleaned it
data
up
to
today.
make.
We're sending you the link.
And the reason I thought it was right on that, but
Basically what it shows is doing the right thing.
Naomi especially is trying to get her arms around things and understand things, and is always pressing us on data. So if at some point we can share this.
Sure, we'll share the YouTube video.
Yeah, there we go, yeah.
So she can watch the conversation with the data
Exactly.
in her hand as well. So no, we'll send a link out to the board.
Thank you.
I'll send
Thank
it
you
to
very
Frank
much.
Thank you.
So just to contextualize a little bit for the board, because back to Mrs. Stevenson comments, it's a lot of data, and even though this appears to be a lot of data, it's a very simplified version of a lot of data. And the reason why I say that is because we hear people say things that sound very simple on the surface, but is actually very complex. And Mr. DeLallo's question also punctuate the point that as a system, and I got to tell you, we're not perfect. We're always trying to figure it out and do it better, because we still have kids who fall through the cracks, and trying to pick them up when they fall is always an ongoing piece, and also dovetails on even the counseling piece. And so I share that with the board and the public, because we try to overshoot in provisions, so hopefully we capture as many, if not all, the kids who need the support as we go through the process, and still, we still have a need to still try to create some customized programs for some of our kids who are simply still not being successful in our system. The alternative ed program, for example, started at the high school. We don't necessarily consider that as an AIS support, but that's a support for a cohort of kids that we know that otherwise wouldn't be successful. And we need to even look at that model and see how we push that model down in earlier grades and capture cohorts of kids and treat their day differently than others. And as I'm speaking here, someone in the audience knows exactly what I'm talking about, because it's tragic when we find out that in May, kids are not successful. And you look back and say, what could we have done differently? Sure, there's always, Monday morning quarterback is hindsight is 2020. The big part of it is what are we doing moving forward in those situations, especially when we still have kids in our system that we could catch, wrap around, lift them up, and say to the parents, guess what? It may not be a 4-year odyssey, it might be a 5-year odyssey, it might be a 6-year odyssey, but it's better than stopping right now. And so I share that with the board because that's going to be our next, if you want to say, our next move as a system, because the challenges for kids are becoming more plentiful. And we have to figure out how do we customize our services even more so for kids. And you hear people say, well, you guys adding more of this, adding more of that. At the end of the day, I always say you pay some now or you pay a hell of a lot later. And so we'd rather invest now as much as we can so that our kids can actually have a bright future. So this is just a start. And I don't want to have the board or the public have the impression that oh yeah, we did this analysis, we're done. This has generated so many questions for us to ask and answer and come back in the coming years with different proposals to the board, say we need to think about doing this, we need to think about doing that, because they're showing us that while we're doing some good stuff, we're not doing good stuff for every kid. And that's an admission that I think we all need to make and know that we have to figure out how we do it better every time, because otherwise we should go out of business. So with that same note, related to the counseling piece, which is a huge component of that piece as well. So how do we wrap around kids not only from an academic piece, but also how do we wrap around kids from understanding their social, emotional, psychological needs? And so I want to just contextualize it, because we have these separate things on an agenda, and someone may look at it, may not see the relationship, but everything is connected. If you kind of stand back for a second and realize that everything is connected in some form or fashion, and if one person does their job very well, it makes the other thing that much more effective, and conversely, if that occurs as well. So I want to put it in context as you're listening to the respective presentation. Mrs. Carmen.
Thank you. So, as Dr. Robinson said, we're presenting the K-12 counseling plan tonight for your review and eventually your approval. The K-12 framework acknowledges the academic, the physical, the social, and emotional development of our students. And Paul's going to review go through the plan very briefly, just to highlight some of the major changes that we've had, and then we're going to highlight some of the work that's been done at the elementary, middle, and high school level for you.
Let's stay on this one. Stay on
You
this
can stay right
Yeah,
here.
I think so. So, thanks, Becky. I think you make a great point, Dr. Robinson. Part of the comprehensive counseling plan is for us to be able to look at what intentional counseling is for kids, for all kids, and to make sure K through 12 that every child walking through the door has a plan in place for them. We understand that there's responsive services, and we have to react to incidences of crises, and we deal with those types of things. But overall, we want to make sure that we have a comprehensive plan aligned and set up for all children. One of the big things that we did this year is the state, you may or may not be aware of that, in 2019 is mandating a comprehensive counseling plan for all schools in the state of New York. And as we like to be out in front of things, this is several years now that we've implemented our comprehensive plan, and in fact, it's aligned with the ASCA model. Mrs. Carmen and I have taken the documentation from the state, and we've looked over it, and we've made sure that as we go through our plan, we've hit all the checkpoints of items that they've identified in the requirements of the state. On top of that, they're also requiring, moving forward, an advisory council. That council is going to be a K-12 advisory. It's required for all schools in the state of New York. We just completed our last high school advisory committee meeting the other day, and a portion of that meeting was discussions on how we're going to move forward to a K-12 advisory for next year. A big part of that is going to be determining the membership, representations from K-12. Along with that, some recommendations for the change of the formal document that the Board of Education had approved. So we'll be presenting that to you later, probably in the summertime, in preparation of the fall of 2018.
No, that's okay. And just real quick, what you see here are just some of the key points that are outlined in the counseling plan here. Amy's going to talk a little bit. This is Mrs. Quinlivan. She's one of our elementary counselors at Tusago. She's going to talk a little bit about the elementary level.
So as a K through 5 counseling department, our work is critical to the success of our students as they move on to middle school. And and begin to develop decision-making, communication, and life skills. During the elementary years, students start to develop their attitude towards school, their confidence and competence as learners and individuals. 3 areas that we concentrated on this year and are going to concentrate on moving forward are the social-emotional learning, the No Place for Hate initiative, and the college and career readiness and exploration. Social-emotional learning, we developed a curriculum in grades K through 3 using a research-based program called Second Step. This program is a vehicle used to deliver the curriculum related to conflict resolution, problem solving, empathy, and skills for learning. This is all done through classroom lessons. And next year, this curriculum will also happen for first and second grade students.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Through classroom lessons
Correct.
given by
Given
by the counselor?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. This summer, we're going to be looking further into this program along with other resources in order to develop a mental health curriculum that will ensure, the alignment with the mental health mandate that starts July 1st. As a department, we're continuing to look at how we can ensure that our students have the strategies necessary to deal with adversity, self-awareness, emotional regulation, and responsible decision-making skills. Behavioral interventions play a key part moving forward with this piece. I'm going to talk a little bit about No Place for Hate. As a district, we continue to be given the designation of No Place for Hate. And as part of the program, each year, we are required to do various activities, cultural kindness, and character education. Class lessons that are given by the counselors on bullying, kindness, and respect for all. Under this initiative, lessons help students to develop social and emotional skills in response to issues that the students may face. On May 16th, all 8 elementary schools were again recognized for being a No Place for Hate school. And as a department, we continue to demonstrate cultural responsiveness by collaborating with stakeholders to create a school and a community climate that embraces cultural diversity and helps to promote academic, career, and social emotional success for all of our students. Last year, we presented on an area that we were starting to explore consistently throughout all 8 of our buildings, and this was career exploration. This year, every building conducted and implemented lessons related to career explorations in 4th or 5th grade. This helped provide our students with an early understanding of career opportunities. And effective college and career readiness really starts at the elementary level and continues all the way up through high school. As an elementary counselor, we are laying out the foundation for work of the counselors in middle school and high school. And elementary school counselors create early awareness, knowledge, and skills that they lay this foundation for the academic rigor and social development necessary for college and career readiness. So that's kind of what we've been doing, where we're kind of headed. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just building upon that from the middle school perspective, you'll see the first thing on there is the HOPS curriculum, the homework, the organization, planning, intervention, skills interventions. And this is a relatively new program that the counselors have started to explore this past year to really work with students who have been identified to help with organizational skills, planning and goal setting skills. And it was piloted last year in one of our schools, and some of the counselors have taken it a little bit further in the other schools. A lot more work to do in this, and we're hoping to expand it a little bit more this coming school year as well. And they implemented it a little bit differently in each of the buildings as it could work with the schedules that they had and the resources that they had within those buildings. So we're working to bring it a little bit more consistent in that manner. The other piece is the cultural competence piece, which Mrs. Quinlivan talked a little bit about with what they're doing at the elementary, similar with what we're doing at the middle school, but taking it even one step further and
the middle school counselors have spent some time really reflecting on their own biases and how that's had an impact or could potentially have an impact, especially when they are doing individual counseling or running groups. And really, the primary focus is really that academic achievement and how do we improve academic achievement and how do we ensure students feel safe when they're at school, you know, no matter who they are, where they come from. And so they're really looking at, you know, that deeper dig into their own biases and also working with individuals and how they can increase that academic achievement. And when they're coming across students who might have some difficulties in that area or who encounter certain problems, it's really trying to identify, is the culture playing a role? And what can we do to make those changes to accommodate them within their environment or make the adjustments that we need to make? And the last piece that you see there from middle school perspective is really the continuing of the Naviance. Naviance is something that we continue to modify. Naviance has made some changes this year, and we have some professional development that we're working on with middle school and high school that's going to be coming up in the next few weeks. But the sixth grade really has revamped a lot of their curriculum based on some of the changes that Naviance has made. But students are really getting on, obviously, a lot sooner and having an earlier understanding of what Naviance is. But it's really that college and career understanding and starting to build interest and responsibility and doing a lot of co-teaching with the health education classes and continuing that those types of opportunities and exposure to that college and career piece of it. Mr. Richard?
So our counselors are really doing some dynamic things through K through 12 programs. I have an opportunity to look at the elementary and talk with Becky about what's been going on, and we're going to meet next week as a K-12 department. We're excited about what it is we're going to be moving forward with in years to come. At the high school, you know, we're continuing with our meetings with students, 9 through 12, individual counseling, monitoring throughout the course of the school year, working with the class assistant principals to monitor data related to academics and behavior and attendance, and provide resources to students as needed. One of the things that we work with Dr. Wood this year on is the program of studies and updating that document. That's still a work in progress. We want to make that more user-friendly for the students. We're thinking about working with a counselor next year as part of a goal for that counselor to see what we can do in terms of utilization of technology to make that a little more user-friendly for our students. You know, a big theme this year as we continue to play on the Jessica Leahy presentation at the beginning of the year is balance for students, noting that we want them to challenge themselves, but be in a position where it's a good balance of rigor versus what I can manage and what I can handle and still be successful. So that's been a big theme. It's been a big part of our communication out with our families and our staff and faculty, and that references collaboration with all stakeholders in particular. A big part of what they've done this year as well is they've seen the gap in our socioeconomic group in terms of a variety of items, and they've made an effort to advocate for resources for students. We're very excited this year to have the opportunity to provide summer school busing and hopefully provide an opportunity for students who may not have been able to go to summer school to go to summer school. So to know that their efforts in advocating were heard by the district was greatly appreciated, and we look forward to providing some data as a result of that. We continued with our peer tutoring program out of the counseling center this year. We've increased the number of connections that we've directly made between students that need assistance and students that are willing to provide assistance. We've learned, I think, the right way to do it, which is to make that one-on-one appointment and get them down there and do the formal meeting. We continue with our class curriculum. Obviously, You have to monitor it as technology changes, in particular the use of the Naviance, and as Becky said, we're going to be doing some professional development to update our counselors on that resource. So that's been a big part of what we've been looking for this past spring. One of the other changes that Dr. Robinson's aware of and Mr. Agustinoni is there's changes into the graduation requirement opportunities, and for counselors to be able to stay on that is very important, along with building level principals. So they've spent quite a bit of time this year making sure that they have gotten the professional development necessary to be aware of what those changes are, and so that they can provide accurate information to families and students. So I think that's about it for us.
Yeah, it was just the last piece on the bottom that you saw across the bottom was that mental health wellness, which is C is the continuum, which is something we all continue to focus on at all levels.
Looking at the whole presentation, listening, it sounds like it's broad and it's proactive, and it's designed to reach the vast majority of our population. It sounds like if it's well implemented and done, it should be successful. I'm a little bit concerned with what happens when we become aware of the fact that there are some kids who have delays or deficiencies in some of these areas. I think we may perhaps internally have the resources and the ability to address those. What if it's pathological? There's something actually wrong with the individual, I'll put it that way. There is a condition that could be diagnosed, in fact, and they are still part of the general population. Do we have the resources to refer them? Do we have the resources to bring to bear or to bring them to those resources?
So I think, Gary, the short answer is yes, and it's situational. Not only situational to the kid, but also situational to the family and their dynamics. But clearly our end result is to, regardless if it's internal support or collaboration with outside providers, to ensure that when the kid is here is in the best situation. And what you just described is not far-fetched. We have kids in our system that we know have multiple struggles and makes the academic journey that much more challenging. And so, we would ideally like to say that, yeah, we have all the resources we want at a ready, but the reality of it is the resources sometimes react to circumstances. And that's why Mr. Ripchick alluded to in the last comment about the ongoing professional development needs, because I guarantee school counselor of 20 years ago is not school counselor of today, and it won't be school counselor of 10 years from now, in terms of how the needs have changed and how we have to evolve as a system. And so we have the counseling piece, but clearly as a system we have psychological supports in place, we have social work supports in place, and the wellness centers, student center. The student center model, that changed the name on me. The student center model is an example of our attempt to try to wrap around kids when we need to wrap around them, and also just give them the space, because sometimes that's what they need, is just the space as well. So it's a combination of things, and I think you just described what some may see as the easiest challenge, but it's probably one of the greatest challenges of our system, to try to address a student with multiple needs and try to figure out which one do we most effectively address first or at all versus some that we don't. And it's always that battle in terms of what's the right lever to pull, so to speak, to create the type of reaction that we want and expect. So, I mean, that is a challenge. That is a challenge.
Kind of developing the thought a little bit further. I know when we have special needs kids, behavior that's a manifestation of the challenge is identified and treated differently than just a gross
Typical,
infraction.
yeah.
It's not treated as a disciplinary situation. Do we have another step in here? When somebody, because of one of these psychological, social things, but not necessarily special education, trips over a line, do they become subject to the disciplinary process, or do we have a restorative justice sort of thing in place to deal with those students so that We're helping them, not punish them.
Yeah, so Gary, our counseling is similar to the RTI model, is tiered. You know, you have your level 1 interventions or programs that all kids get, and then if at some point in time they don't achieve, or we see that there's a delay in some area, then they get to that level 2. So things get a little more, you know, intensive, to the point at some point where it may be a level 4 where we can't provide a service, and we have outside resources that we provide to them. But we look at all different resources, whether it be a discipline-based incident or you know, it's somebody who's dealing with a depression, or it's a family, it might be a family crisis. So, you know, we do have in place these different levels that the kids that we work through.
I just have a quick question, and I might be overstepping bounds, so you can slap my hand later, but slap it now. Because especially expanded the K through 12, and we're going to be mandated to do that. I know at the high school level, again, this is my assumption, because I've seen it as a parent, you know, the counselors work closely with the teachers and the staff. They're very fully aware of the role of the counselors, and the expanded role, it seems to continue to expand with all the diverse needs of our students and more complex needs. But now if we're saying the K, you know, through 5 or K through even middle school, is this something, and again, I may be overstepping, something at superintendents at the next one where there's workshops or doing some kind of presentation to all staff and teachers at, you know, every level, to have a better understanding of really that collaboration, that partnership, and how it will reflect, you know, on the day-to-day conversations with our...
I'm not sure if I'm totally understanding, because there's not really changes in what the counselors are doing necessarily. Right. It's more of the counseling advisory piece that's changed more. But the counselors, we can always do more education to the staff as a whole about what the role of the counselors are and communicate that out. We can always do a better job and you know, be more transparent, you know, in getting information out. However, you know, the role hasn't changed. You know, it evolves, you know, with what, depending on the needs of the students and some of the changes of what's come down.
And I understand it's more the CAC, the counseling advisory, but again, you know, even though their roles, a lot of people know their roles, it's still, the complex needs we just keep seeing more and more needs for our students. I think it's just having that continued dialogue and just showing some of the changes too, although it's the CAC, how this will play out, you know, as a district. It's just a thought I had, and don't know again how it will play out, but, and also further, you know, professional development for counselors, again, as we more and more complexity that we're seeing with our students, just making sure we're always up, and I know we're very good about that as a district, but as Dr. Robbins said, we're not perfect, and I just want to make sure, you know, we continue to look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as we prepare to transition to the next presentation, just want to, Ron, you guys can come ahead. For the high school one-to-one presentation, just wanted to comment on Mr. DeLallo's question, Gary, because I think we answered a portion of your question. When it comes to disciplinary code of conduct violations, and we recognize that the student has a particular, I'm going to use the word issue generically, that may have led to a particular action. It doesn't excuse the violation of the code of conduct, but particularly when things turn into a superintendent's hearing, which means a potential suspension beyond 5 days. One of the things we can't do, and I think it's important, the reason I'm making this point, we cannot mandate that a child get counseling. We can't do that. All we can do is suspend. And so one of the things that we have been over the years, and Mr. Amelia, who does all those, even though we call superintendents here, and I actually don't do the hearing myself, Mr. Amelia has done the hearings over the past 10 years now probably. One of the things that we do when we have those situations, be it psychological counseling, being drug counseling, we say to the parents that, okay, little Mary will come back in May without counseling, but if little Mary goes and get drug counseling and shows clean drug tests for 30 days or whatever, I'm just using drug for example, she may come back back in March. And so what that does then, say to the parents, well, how serious are you about having your kid back into the environment? Because we can't say to the parents, you must do this. The law doesn't allow us to do that. So we use that process to, some case, trigger, and some cases we know parents don't have the support. And so part of, even when kids come back, we say, when your child come back, you'll be meeting with this psychologist, this person, for a period of time to help that transition back into the environment. So we do a lot of those type situations that you just described. So I think it's important to know that we can't mandate it, but we use the suspension ability to say we'll reduce your suspension one way or the other by having, in most cases that we have our kids with drug-related type things, we want to try to force them on the right track or back on the right track. And sometimes we have some real psychological things, and those are the more difficult ones, because I've said it before in this group, and it's nothing against people who are in the business, but we don't have a lot of high-quality psychological services that go to the root cause of some of the things that's affecting kids right now. That's a struggle. That's a national struggle that has to be figured out in order for us to more effectively meet the needs of kids, because people go and, have 3 sessions of, why you hate your mother and father, and you feel good about it, and the kids come back, and next week the kid is doing the same thing again, and we're just repeating the whole thing over. So I say that because that's a struggle for the high school folks and middle school, well, particularly high school folks all the time, and we hear, well, why can't you as a school do more? Well, we would love to, but the reality of it is we're somewhat constrained by some of those factors. So it was a great question. I didn't want that to be missed in the conversation here, because it's a huge, again, I'm pointing out these challenges, only because it's easier to point out all the things we're doing well. The things we're doing well, hell, we know those things. It's the challenges that we always got to wrestle with and try to figure out better solutions. And I think it's important for the board know that we're always trying to wrestle with these challenges, and we're not going to come to you and pretend like it's a panacea and a utopia and everything is nice and wonderful. We have challenges all the time as we move forward. So kind of segue to even this, the challenge of emerging technology and where schools are evolving to. And I'm going to say that, and they may say it in the presentation, but I'm going to tell you, you read today's paper, the TU was a parent in Bethlehem saying that, oh, I'm going to ban my kids from using technology because of A, B, and C. We're going to have a ton of them in Clifton Park. We may have people at the board table, for that matter, who said, don't give my kid technology. And we know that. We had people, and I'm going to go back to my Burnox Wrestler days, where we had communities saying, don't offer kids Regents courses because they're farmers and they're not going to leave the hill towns. So we showed them data. You're right, they're not leaving the hill towns because they don't have the credentials to leave the hill towns. And so as schools, sometimes we step into things knowing that we're going to go through that storming phase, and when things are normalized, no one's going to look back at the storming. They're just going to look at, hey, have we always been doing this? And you're going to hear some middle school folks. 3 years ago, we were talking about middle school one-to-one. Oh my God, we got all the community news commentary, wasting money, this and this and this. And now, so I'm sharing that with the board because we're going to hear that again and again, but we're not planning for it today. We're planning what will the high school, what will the secondary level be 3-5 years from now. That's where the sweet spot is. What will we look like then? If we look into the future, subsequent, what do we have to do now to be there at some point? And so Mr. Casey pointed out his grandkid, when the grandkid graduates in the class of 2030, who's in kindergarten now, what would a class of 2030, we'll be sitting here telling kids that you have to carry 15 binders in middle school with you, or we'll be sitting here with a middle school kid who actually, what is a binder? And that's where we want to be. That's where we want to be. I'm sharing that with you because as we go through these rollouts, be prepared to hear as board members, people making comments, oh, this is a waste, this is this. You know what, it's okay. We tolerate that, knowing that we're not dealing with today. We're planning for how things are going to change tomorrow. So I just kind of put that as a backdrop to you as a board because it's a significant investment of resources, but it's also a significant shift in direction. And we're talking about now a huge shift going into high school. So I just want to contextualize what you may hear from the folks here tonight.
So is this these 8 people here, are they the Army?
That's the Army, the entourage.
It's actually a reflection of the fact
fact that we don't just buy Chromebooks, we actually put a lot of time and energy and other resources into the full integration of mobile devices. If this were simply about buying a whole bunch of Chromebooks and handing them out, we wouldn't have all that you're going to be hearing. So we're actually going to start with how's it going at the middle school, because our best source of what guides us moving forward is how are we doing right now where we actually have one-to-one. So each administrator or presenter that comes up will introduce him or herself in the event that you don't already know them, and then we'll come back at the end for questions.
Are you doing this?
I'll get it going. I'm John Burns, principal of Acadia Middle School. We were here 2 years ago, just a quick review. We were here 2 years ago to talk to you folks about requesting the one-to-one program as a pilot program in grade 6. At that time, we were talking about approximately 800 kids. Had a very successful year. We came back 1 year ago and did a presentation hoping to expand the program into the entire middle school, grades 6, 7, and 8, going from approximately 800 Chromebooks up to approximately 2,400 Chromebooks. And now we're 9 months into it, and things are going very, very, very well. And we thought we'd take a few minutes and just do a quick review, as Dr. Wood said, as you begin to think about the next step of this whole process, and that's moving it up into the high school. So one of the things we thought we would do is just do a quick review of the program goals that we talked to you about a year ago, goals that we talked to you about 2 years ago, and they hold steady for us. The first goal, increase student engagement, and we do this while working to find an appropriate balance of instructional strategies. But at the same time, we're realizing that the computer screen is the pen and paper of our time. And we see it every day, and we see it alive and kicking all throughout our building, throughout our halls, in the cafeteria, everywhere we go. The kids are engaged. Increased individualized and collaborative learning, again, it's thriving throughout the middle school. Increased personal productivity through the use of organizational tools that are available to the students. One of the things that Dr. Robinson is talking about, the agenda books. The agenda books will go away in a couple of years. And they'll go away because of the availability of these tools that we have on the Chromebooks. And the goal that's always struck me from way back on day one when we started this, expanded access to learning beyond the school day. And the important part, leveling the playing field for all students. And that's been crucial to the program. Mr. Nat will now talk to you folks. Thank you.
Hello, Sean Nat, I'm the principal of Coda Middle School. So I'm going to just touch very quickly again on why we were planning this rollout. We always kept coming back to the why, and we continue to always be cognizant of why are we doing this. And you've probably seen a graphic like this or similar to this before, and it really aligned with the why that we had set up earlier, and really comes down to several things. Really just transforming teaching and learning, and if you use either the RAD or the SAMR model in terms of moving lessons with technology to the highest level of the redefinition or the transformational stages. And I'm seeing it literally before my eyes as I'm going through all my observations this year and seeing some of those lessons really be transformed. And not only the lessons being transformed, then the learning being transformed. It's been phenomenal. And, you know, the lessons are becoming higher, more engaging and more student-centered. And I think that's what we're starting to hear. I'm sure some of the counselors will let us know that's what they're looking for at the colleges as well. And finally, the students taking charge of their own learning. And to see the feedback that some of these students are able to give one another now is just tremendous. So I certainly think we're off to a tremendous start. More than 2/3 of our staff is really just finishing up the first year. It seems like it's been longer, but we're off to a tremendous start. So I'm going to introduce now our technology. She doesn't like coach. Hold on, let me come up. Collaborator, Vanessa. Thank you.
Good evening, board. I feel like it was just a couple of years ago I was standing in front of all of you talking about technology in my math classroom. I had the opportunity this year to take a leave from my classroom and be the instructional technology collaborator with the middle school staff.
So is that official title change now?
I
You did it to the board, so it must be official.
I don't really love coach because
Mrs. Bush will make that change tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. Because I feel like the staff teaches me something every day that I learn, so I love working with them and hopefully taking all of our knowledge and making the middle schools a better place. 17 years to take a break from something. I hope you realize that technology really is a passion of mine. But I'm not just a fan of the technology, I'm a fan of the pedagogy, of understanding how people learn in the most effective learning methods, and I'm really excited about the change that technology can bring. I'm going to show you a video right now of the
1 second, Mr. Ken, can you make sure the sound is... Good.
It's right behind Dr. Wood.
Okay, just hit play and see what happens.
Hi, I'm Cindy Gray. I teach 8th grade math at Coda Middle School. Nice transformation lesson that I had used in the past with graph paper and directions and a self-rubric for the students. And I went to Vanessa Kramer to help me take the old lesson that I liked and transform it by using technology to make it more engaging and effective for the students. What I did was had the students create a Google presentation using Google Slides, and they were all working together, and where all the students worked together on individual slides in one presentation. I could monitor the students' work in real time, so if students needed help, I could immediately assist them. I then created the Google Slides presentation into Pear Deck. Using the Pear Deck platform, we were able to see each other's slides and analyze the sequence of transformations. In my old lesson, if students were graphing on paper, they wouldn't have been able to see that many student responses and the ideas. So this allowed with the technology to have everyone see each other's sequences and answer questions.
Hi, I'm Amy Daly. I teach in Guana Middle School and I teach 7th grade Spanish. This year, my students embarked upon a video exchange program with a school in Zaragoza, Spain.
Hola mis amigos, me llamo Luz. Tengo 13 años. Me gusta cantar, escribir y leer. I have 2 brothers and a mom. I have 7 dogs and I love them all. I also love to listen to music and draw, even though I'm not too good.
Hello, my name is Joel. I am 13 years old and my hobbies are playing soccer and meeting with friends. I have a sister. Her name is Laura, and she is 9 years old.
I also asked the students what they thought about doing some speaking assessments this way. This has been very amazing as well. These students who usually are very shy and not as willing to speak in class have shown confidence and shown their ability with the videos just to me.
My name is Chris Anderson. I teach Guana 6th grade science. So the first thing is, how do we create opportunities for choice in the classroom? How can we get students to learn in different ways that they might want to choose? The first is to create a resource that you want to share with the students. For me, I do units, so every unit has different choices, a summary, and then different online resources. I give the students a variety of different choices and how they might do the vocabulary or practice or different labs. I do labs. And then in the end, they create a unit based on a form that they create. So all the different ways that they could possibly use, including their own choice if they want to, are put together. And then that basically is sent to me in a giant Google form sheet, which I then use an add-on called Autocrat. And Autocrat basically takes the form, does some wizardry, and merges it with a document that I created up here that I wanted to share with them. From there, they get, instead of a blank template, they get one that's personalized to their name, and if you look closely, then their choices for how they do different activities, whether it be play posits or notes or note cards or Google Slides, and how they do their main activities are their choice. So thanks, and if you have any questions, you can always find me in G4 or ask Ms. Kramer.
I just wanted to thank you guys for the opportunity to work, and just to let you know that technology is not just offered apps to us here at the middle school, but opportunities. So thank you very much.
One of the highlights, I'm Robin Gores, the building principal here at Gowanna, and one of the things I will mention, and it's not actually on our highlighted list there, is John, Sean, and I are in the midst of doing our summative evaluations of, with our conferences with teachers. And I can't even share with you the vast amount of teachers that have said to us the work that they've done with Vanessa, and it's highlighted in their summative conference. And so I really think, we're reaping the benefits of that, but that's not one of the highlights up here. But as you can see, I'm not going to read all of them, but as well as the ELA testing, I know Gowanna, we just finished our first field testing for mathematics. So the students did have an opportunity this year to also, some of the students to get to see what that was all about. But the one thing I really wanted to point out to you, besides some of the list of things here, is our main thing that we worked on with our students is the digital citizenship. And if anything can come out of this, is they are going to be in a digital age, whether it's their phone at home, their Chromebook here in school, or all the above, wherever they happen to be. We work very hard, and I work with the middle school administrators, with Vanessa and John Bullington. We work really hard to make sure that we are going over different modules with the kids, and we're already planning for Superintendent's Conference Day in September. And we talk about each grade has 4 or 5 modules that every teacher is trained. Every single teacher sees the different modules that we talk to the kids about. And we really talk to those kids about what's the history all about. What's going to happen if you talk about bullying in your Google Doc? It gets flagged. What happens if you're swearing? What happens if you're threatening? And it's one thing to be maybe a Google Doc here, but what does that translate to if that's your cell phone and you do that and it's to somebody else? And so there's a lot of teaching tools that are coming from this, as well as all of the instructional pieces as well, just because I think that's what we're here for, is we want to teach them all about this technology. So it's just not, the instructional piece is obviously huge. However, we really need to teach them about the digital citizenship and how that can impact their world when they're doing things that may not be as appropriate. So a lot of great things here, and what we're really excited too is to see how our 8th grade teachers, this will be the first year this coming up where the kids have had 6th, 7th, and 8th grade with them, and just to kind of see what's the student looking like, and we'll get some feedback from them at the end of next year. So we appreciate your time this evening, and I think we're going to turn this over to the high school.
Yes.
So Ron.
So we'll try not to be too redundant with some of the stuff middle school said. I'm Ron Gassoni, building principal at the high school. Lucas LeVere, assistant principal for 12th grade, and Mike Gutschel, associate principal for 9th grade. They're going to kind of jump in as we go through this. But I would say this is an exciting time as we roll out Chromebooks. If you think about the shift is happening, and we mentioned 2030 and what we're looking forward to, but it's happening now. If you go back in time, we think about, we used to bring students to technology. We used to bring them to labs when that was getting rolled out in the early 90s. And you talk about money and resources. Space is a resource, and it's an expensive resource. So now those spaces are kind of turning into learning commons. This ties into what we're doing with the library. We no longer have to bring students to the technology will be with our students. So that's kind of happening now. It's really exciting to see. And you saw some of the program goals, which will be similar for the high school, but we spoke to our teachers, and they kind of told us these things. And this is like hot off the press. We spoke with them the other day, and we met with them about some of the digital citizenship stuff, which we'll talk about shortly. But we met with our implementation team, and we said, remember we spoke about goals earlier in the year, and we had discussions about what does it look like to have an ideal lesson in class. Well, tell us what you're excited about. And they talked about these things. They said personalized learning. These direct quotes from our teachers: personalized learning, innovative and efficient, peer-to-peer feedback, immediate feedback. Those are things that really help students grow, and that's what can happen. Now, can that happen without the technology? On some level, yes. But if we want to get here, we're going to have to introduce that stuff, and that's what we're excited about, and that's what's currently happening. So it's happening in pockets in the high school, and it's happening on some level in the high school, because we do have Chromebooks, and teachers are using them in carts. It's just not to the level it will be. As we roll forward, I know Mike and Lucas might jump in here, but as Dr. Robinson always says, he says there's a method to the madness. Is that the phrase he always uses? You can see here there is nothing's in isolation. Dr. Wood has talked about the Future Ready framework. You see it up there. It ties with time and space and curriculum. The ISTE standards. SAMR was mentioned by our middle school folks. I know Mike really wants to talk about the bottom right or bottom left up there, which is SAMR rolled over.
Yeah, it's an infusion of SAMR with Understand by Design and that framework. So those two areas synthesize together. And what it really points out are two big things. When new technology is implemented in classrooms without pedagogy that deepens the knowledge, the impact on learning is minimal. So that's like the top left there. You know, you can get to that transformation stage of the SAMR model, but if it doesn't correlate or translate into that deeper thinking and learning, it really is at minimizing impact on that. However, when teachers require students to use that sophisticated technology in order to transfer their learning to new situations, other disciplines, or the real world, deeper learning experiences that were unimaginable not too long ago are able to be achieved, and student learning can enter new frontiers. So this is exciting stuff. I know that, Mr. Casey, you mentioned your youngest grandchild, 2030. That's my daughter. My youngest daughter will be the class of 2030. So it's stuff that we can't imagine now that's going to be conducted by your grandson, my daughter. So we're really excited about that.
And Mr. Casey, just make sure that's not conducting together.
Exactly, yeah.
Just a joke, side joke.
I'm with you. I was thinking the same thing.
And I have plenty of daughters. So 2033 will be a little class. So, as we roll this out, a couple things. Training was a big thing for us, and will continue to be a big thing for us. We had an implementation team. We had 30 teachers, maybe 31 teachers, several administrators that were part of this team, and they put together training for the conference day. Our big thing was we wanted to focus on training that was level. We have some people that are scared, they're nervous, technology scares me, I'm not going to use it with my students, so we wanted to focus on level PD for teachers. So it could be as simple as someone not understanding cloud computing. Oh, I can type here and it shows up there at that basic level, and then we had advanced training, and it was led by our teachers, and we had a matrix of stuff Dr. Wood put together and John Bullington put together. They signed up, and they went to these trainings. We heard great feedback from our teachers with that, and actually I had a summative today with a teacher who teaches social studies at High School West, and she said people are still contacting me from East to West. Hey, how did you do this? So that's what we wanted. We wanted that continuation. So now they have people they can go to in the building. And it was also not gimmicky training. It was stuff they can use every day. We really wanted to put information in their hands that they can use regularly that helps their workflow. And Lucas, you were part of the team. Do you want to just talk a little bit about some of the things you did in your small groups?
Yeah, I think one of the values of the implementation team was that it was a wide variety of teachers from all different grade levels. They were there with a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences. So some, like Ron said, were very active already with the technology. Others were just kind of dabbling into it and wanted to know more. And we really started off with conversations about two things. What did they think some of the goals should be for implementing technology into instruction? What were some of the needs that they saw that we could support them with so that they could be most effective, so that they could use the technology to the best of their abilities? And out of those conversations, one of the big pieces that did come forth, of course, was the need for training. And we came up with their help with a handful of different ways that we could get that training to them. One of them was the Superintendent's Conference Day trainings that Ron mentioned. I had a chance to kind of sit with a group of those teachers and brainstorm with them through that process. And then I also had a chance to actually lead one of the trainings for some of our teachers as well. I'm no expert, and I kind of see myself as somewhere in the middle. I definitely had a chance to work with a lot of the technology, but it was amazing to see some of the advanced sessions and things that folks were already doing and wanted to know more about. I do like the fact that teachers also had a chance to interact and give feedback and kind of steer the direction of those trainings. So some of them, especially the mid-level and the advanced trainings, were really led by the questions of the teachers. We came there just as more of a roundtable session where folks could come with their questions and their needs. And I think that the feedback for the most part was very positive. This team will stay together and continue to move forward. We try to consult them and use them to offer ideas and brainstorm any of the steps that we're taking as we move to the rollout, whether it be distribution, whether it be the way that we're going to implement the digital citizenship training. They're going to be part of that decision-making process the whole way through, which I think is a good thing because it increases their buy-in in the whole process.
So as we roll forward, 3,261 Chromebooks, I think, next year. How the heck do we do that, right? So when we're talking about 2030, how we roll them out in 2018 probably won't matter as much, but if we don't do it correctly, it can set us back. And I hate to use a sports analogy, right, but if you draft the wrong quarterback, the team gets set back a number of years. Same idea. If we roll this out incorrectly, and we don't get it started off on the right foot, it'll set us back a little bit of time. And we don't want that. So we've talked about how we're going to roll them out. We've worked with Ken McDermott and John Bollington and how we're getting them into the hands of students. And it's going to look a little different in West than East just because of some of the setups. But we do have a plan on how we're getting 3,200 and change Chromebooks into students' hands with their chargers, how we're accounting for them, how we know each barcode is assigned to a certain student. We have summer curriculum work that'll be running up with some of our teachers. High school delivering common sense media. Again, we have to be flexible to realize it will look a little different in High School West when we deliver common sense media lessons, which they talk about in middle school, versus how we do it in High School East. So we have a plan how we're going to roll that out with our teachers in departments. There are going to be windows in departments, and we'll be rolling that out. And the last thing we're going to touch on quickly is our help desk, which I think is really exciting. It's something that's going to get our students involved. They're actually going to be part of the team. They are going to have their own. We have the Chrome Care Rooms. We're going to have Chrome Care Room with a help desk team, almost like the Geek Squad would be or the Genius Bar. And I know you've both been intimately involved, and so is John. We have interviews coming up.
We have the 8th graders going to 9th grade on Friday, 10th graders next Tuesday, and upcoming juniors and seniors next Thursday. So 10-minute interviews, 56 students now.
So we have 56 students interested in being part of the help desk thing. The goal for this help now, what it looks like in September, is not what it looks like 2 Septembers from now when we come give you an update. The idea is that this team is going to be together. They're going to staff the Chrome Care Rooms or the help desk rooms all day long, before school, after school. They're going to eventually be doing repairs. They're going to be doing videos. They're going to be helping with that stuff that will be happening with teachers and with students. We've seen it in other schools. We've visited some schools. It's a robust program that we think can really pay big dividends here. And the fact that we already have 56 students interested without anyone seeing it. We're talking about branding and getting them shirts and kind of doing things like that. We have junior citizenship pass and that kind of stuff for the high school. They would have like the same type of thing where they would get a little more freedom in school. We don't know where that freedom will lie on the IT level. We're kind of talking about that. But as we get going, we expect that to be a good program and one of the integral parts of this rollout.
Very much like a job is the way we're approaching that student help desk.
And along with that, it's more than just the technology. It's about customer service. So the students that we're going to interview and select for the help desk, they're going to get 2 days of training, and most of that training is going to be on customer service. How to, I would say, handle a situation where a teacher is really frustrated with the technology, about just to, pull the plug on it. These are the types of skills that the soft skills that without the training that we can give them here, they're going to have a tougher time out there. So if we could work with our students here, and they already have the technology piece. A lot of these kids want to do this because they're tech savvy. They want to really get their hands dirty. They want to learn more about it. But they might not have those soft skills that will get them employed out there. So we want to help them become employable by teaching those skills here so that when they deal with the irate customer a few years from now, whatever job they have, they can handle the situation much better. So I know that's going to be a big part of the
The
training.
applicants were all over the place, though, too. They weren't all techies that you would call traditional techies. Some of them really were interested in the helping people, customer service piece of it. It's really interesting, really.
Good, so questions, board?
The most shocking statement that I heard from Ron said some of the teachers are like a little bit phobic about using computers, and I'm reflecting. This is like, okay, 30 years ago, 1988, Apple IIes were already coming into the classrooms. There were computer classrooms. There was Minnesota Consortium where you could get software and bring it into the classroom and so forth. And it's most of those teachers that were teaching then, they're gone.
Yeah.
They're tier one people. They're gone. They're collecting their pension. It surprises the heck out of me that there are still people that are not comfortable with technology, aren't excited by it and ready to adopt it.
And I think we've clarified that there, right, you get all range, right, in any sort of large number, but there are the ones who use it comfortably themselves, but then thinking about how to integrate it with students is a whole nother hurdle, where you've got 28 students and they're all in their own individual place. So it's as much about shifting your view in front of the classroom, like how you see yourself. Are you a facilitator, or are you, I'm standing and delivering and all eyes on me? And there's room for both, but turning over some of the freedom to students to learn on their own, that takes a different approach.
I think you're right. I think if I could just jump in, I think that, different teachers need different levels of support to get to that end goal. And I think that's the key. I don't know that too many are really scared of the end goal. It's just some of them are nervous about making sure that they have the right supports and understanding how that process is going to work. So, I know that the recent budget had the addition of a support person similar to Mrs. Kramer's role at the high school, which would be great, helping teachers to transform their lessons and helping collaborate, not coach, those teachers. I know that there's already a lot of PLC work with the academic administrators to help teachers start to shift their lessons so that they're more adapted to technology. So I think there's a lot of things in place and more to come to help them kind of get over that hurdle and reach that end goal.
Can you mention balance? So it's not the same. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's not the same. So your classroom, you might be using 80% technology, and you might be using 50, and that's okay. There's a balance, and it's some of your personality ties into it, some of the classroom you have, some of your students tie in, but we just want to make sure that we're striking the right balance for the class and for the instructor, and making sure that those kids are getting the most out of it they can.
Yeah, so I wanted to add, from Didic and hearing some of the feedback, one of the teachers said, and I didn't hear this, and I thought this is a big pro, and his comment was that the students are communicating over the teachers via mostly email. Well, I shouldn't say only or primarily email, but meaning that in the past there's been especially in middle school, they want children advocating or doing more of that, and the parents taking a step back and letting them explore and grow that way. And that was one of the pros I heard from the rollout, is that there is more direct communication with the teachers. And it could be the Google Classroom, it could be that, and it's easier to do that, but I thought that was worth mentioning. And so one of the challenges, I think, will be the rollout in the high school, getting them to accept it. Because as I see it, there's a big difference between middle school and high school, and that being you're not allowed to have your cell phone in middle school in the classroom, and you are in high school, and these cell phones are mini computers. And so dealing with that resistance, although as I hear you talk about the help desk, that's exciting because it sounds like they're going to be making training videos. And so I think they're going to do a better job of selling this to their peers than we are, because they see us as Luddites. We don't know what we're talking about. But when they hear it from their peers that they respect, I think it'll be a different experience altogether. But right now, like when I went to the Senate Speak Out last week, there's still some resistance they still see this being forced on them. And I shared some of the, and of course, the administration's heard some of the feedback too. But doing that cell, I'm not sure what you have planned next, but I think that'll be critical because it will be a very different audience in a high school that you're working with in a larger group too. So.
Yeah, we know that not every student is really excited, right? Every senior isn't saying, I'm counting down the day until they hand me my Chromebook, because really it's an instrument for them to produce work on, which is part of it. There's also a big difference in orientation to work from a sixth grader to a senior. We know that our students who are moving through middle school have a more positive orientation to the integration of technology as they go. And this isn't to say all seniors aren't. Some are probably going to be quite excited about it. But we do have some work to go. But it also speaks to, I think one of the questions that came up was, well, why are we giving them to students? Why don't we just put them in the classrooms? And we just ran some quick numbers today, which we knew. But just outfitting High School West alone, to have every student be able to have a device in every classroom that they go to, we would have to purchase minimally 1.5 number of the devices that we purchase on a one-to-one. That's minimally. That's not accounting true for all, that's just classroom spaces, and that doesn't mean that they could use it in other spaces as well. And then they sit idle a tremendous amount of time as well.
Oh, and one more question I had about the help desk. In the middle school, when a Chromebook is damaged, there's a triage room, and then the families bill. Are the kids going to take on that too, and they're going to handle the billing? So there's a business component to this as well. I think that's pretty exciting.
Potentially.
With some
Potentially.
supervision and guidance.
Oh, okay.
Again, I think it's going to grow and develop.
Yeah. Okay.
Free child labor is awesome.
Just one question. How many?
Job training.
How much does a Chromebook cost these days?
Mr. McDermott.
Couple $100.
Roughly.
You don't have to come up.
$200.
Okay, yeah. So a point I want to make is, and there isn't a big audience here at this point, but when we purchase a new system, journeys, all those kinds of things, every time we make a decision in a school like this, it's a big decision. It's a big cost. So when we were looking at journeys and we were looking at Go Math, that was 900,000 something. That's a lot of money, and we have it for a period of time. We're, I think, coming to recognize more and more that there is an end life to all this stuff that we. But this is a big decision. I'm going to make a quick number. This is $750,000 decision we made. We don't make those decisions lightly, and that doesn't count the support. That's just hardware to get it in here, right?
There's definitely a transition in the type of hardware that we're investing in because, as Mr. Agostadoni said earlier, we used to take the kids through the technology.
Yeah.
Now they're taking it with them. So some of those spaces that were previously PC labs are being broken down because we have the technology in the classroom. We're probably at a ratio about 3 to 1, 3 Chromebooks to every PC price-wise. So that's helping us with our fiscal plan.
And Ken, you can assert to us that you can handle this. Our system can handle this.
Yes.
This traffic, right? Yeah. Okay.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And as our colleagues take a seat, just can kind of summarize a couple of thoughts to make sure that we have some takeaways. We're not starting from scratch. So I think it's important because I think sometimes people hear this rollout, they're thinking we're starting from scratch. We have technology in our classroom and our spaces being used now, a lot of great best practices in the high school. The key is how do we tap into more collaborators, like Mrs. Kramer pointed out to. And so we may actually have to take a different look at in terms of do we have 1, 2, or 3 Vanessa Kramer-like individuals in high school? I don't know, but the point is if we don't, we then have to figure out how do we tap into other folks and probably use a different model to make sure that best practices are being championed. And so just one of those, I shared it with the board because, we like to have consistent models, but if the consistent model is not working consistently, we make the modifications as we move forward. And also, this is a pretty opportune time when you think about the high school. We're at an interesting transition point with new leadership in high school, and it's opportune time to talk about signature practices. You know, where will the high school look like in 5-10 years? And so I just want to keep that context as we roll forward, knowing again that as board members, you're going to hear people say things, argue different points, and I would venture to say whatever you hear, whatever people argue, we probably have heard it and argue those points too, and we go into every decision knowing that there are pros and there are cons. And we want to say as long as the pros highly outweigh the cons, we're moving forward. And try to figure out how do we factor those cons in our decision-making process as we evolve. So I just want to make sure that we know we're not going to a blinding. The last piece I just want to mention on the agenda, we last week were part of a press conference with the Saratoga County Sheriff Department, and it's an interesting development that's being evolved. Kudos to Sheriff Zerlo, and I'm not saying that from just a public policy perspective, but I think he has a sincere desire to ensure that the law enforcement agency, which the Saratoga County Sheriff Department is in this county, is trying to be on the forefront of the whole school safety initiative. And there's no model, there's no abundance of funding, and so some of the burdens shift back to schools. And so right now we're in the process of looking at a memorandum of understanding, and I shared a draft with you as a board. I could tell you that the draft, the final document, is going to probably look different from the draft because there's some fundamental things that's outlined in the MOU that we agree with, those 4 bullet points in principle, but in execution could be slightly different. And so we'll work through some of those kind of things because we want to talk to our legal counsel too to make sure that as we get to these commitments, we're on sound ground in terms of our authority. We're not hiring a sheriff. We don't hire the person. We're contracting with the sheriff department. It's an important point because they're not an employee of the school district. They're members of the Saratoga County Sheriff Department. So right now, and it's not necessarily asking board for approval because the sheriff just wants a plan. I think that from a school district, while some in the community may say we need to have one person at every building, the feasibility of it versus actually the effectiveness of it is to be questioned to some degree. Right now, the recommendation would be to have 2 school resource officers and create some capacity where, and you know, if you ask me to answer, well, we have one for elementary, one for secondary. Quite frankly, it could be based upon the given day. We may have people in different places. And one of the commitments the sheriff has said he will continue with is the continuous presence of law enforcement beyond the school resource office. In other words, what we don't want is, okay, Shen, you have your 2 officers and then we don't see anyone else. So I don't think that's going to be the case as well. And we really want to see how it works very well. We've had a school resource officer here from, I think, 2006 until 2010 maybe. We had a gentleman from the state police, and that was funded by the governor's office. And that was largely preliminary in a high school base with some floating. And we have that experience to learn from as well as other experience that we bring to the table. So I'm sharing that with the board because at this point, it's more so of giving the sheriff department an indication that, one, our interest is more than just an interest, that we're willing to make some commitment so they can start hiring and doing the planning forward. And once we finalize the MOU here for some of our specific needs, that would then come back to the board at some point for a more formalized agreement. So I'll stop there in case there are questions that you may have as a board that I could try to address.
Quick question. So the way this is working out, it's across Saratoga, but each district is developing their own customized version of the MOU. It's not all the superintendents are kind of saying, there's a group would like it to be modified.
And I think they'll be more similar than different, because obviously the county lawyer is not going to say we want to have put X number of completely different documents. But I think our needs will be reflected in our respective piece. And the one hiccup, if I want to say one hiccup, the one challenge moving forward is right now the model is still largely based upon ability to pay. So there are school districts in the county that don't have the budget capacity to do it, that probably won't engage a school resource officer. And I hope and pray, not to inject religion into the equation, that at some point, people in particular legislative places realize that it should not be based upon ability to pay in any community, and see this as a larger investment for schools. I think some of that conversation is starting to heat up in New York. In Texas, no. In New York, I think there's a potential for that conversation to start heating up in terms of looking at funds out there, taxpayers' funds in a large aggregate, and how can we make sure then that this, because even our decision to some degree is the ability to pay. When I say ability to pay, okay, it's a matter, do we invest all in this thing, or do we invest in multiple things to address safety in a broader sense? And so that's where the challenge is, still in the process. But kudos, we're certainly as a county taking a greater step than most counties have taken so far. And with that being the case, there's a mile yet to go.
So let me just ask you a question. Is there not a
consensus?
Currently
Yes.
getting a vote here, but is there a consensus here that we say to the superintendent, keep going the way you're going in terms of pushing for 2 here?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm comfortable with the approach. I think the challenge will be for the sheriff. He's got all these school districts, and we have to be sympathetic to that. At the same time, we're a unique school district. We have unique policies. I think relative to other schools, I've always heard that we have a lot of well-developed policies on security. And I think earlier in the year, we had some discussion about, and this is like in November, December timeframe, there's always been a concern when we had police officers show up armed to schools. We've always had concerns when, in one case, I think we had an incident many years ago, we had an undercover police officer with a weapon in their car that showed up at the school. And now that's all changed since Parkland. And I think we all have to kind of understand that we're living at a time that, you know, right now people are very pro-police, okay? And the way America works, within 2 years, sometimes it completely reverses because there's something happening. And so we have to kind of realize that we have these well-developed policies. How do we get them to work in such a way that it's complementary to both police actions and school actions?
Agreed. Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of detail here.
A good example, someone spoke to me in the community, and I started to bring it back up. Someone said, you know, why don't you do it like they do it in the mall? Why don't you, in the mall, they've got a substation. Well, in a mall, it's not a school. In a mall, you don't have the disciplinary and actions and engagement that you have with your administrators. So in a school itself, you have the principals and the assistant principals running things. And so the police can be much more complementary if you figure all that out ahead of time. Sorry about that.
Good. Gary?
Just today, I was reading some additional material talking about the most recent shooting in Santa Fe. And one of the things they talked about was at Lakeland, was it, in Florida. The response time was 6 minutes. 17 people killed, 17 wounded. In Santa Fe, it was 4 minutes, 10 people killed, 3 people wounded. Now, the fact that wasn't as balanced as wounded and killed as was in Lakeland was a manifestation of the weapon. Shotgun is a much more devastating weapon. It may not have the rate of fire, but if you get hit with a shotgun, you're going to do massive damage. But the point there would be the response time. And while the officers that we would have available would not primarily be there as an armed presence, as an immediate response, that would be one of the byproducts. The ability to develop relationships with the students and education, and to be a person who would be another listening point to get information that would prohibit, or not prohibit, but would give us an opportunity to be aware of potential threats is very, very important. So it is a multiple phase thing. And I think that this is a great step in the right direction. And we'll do many other things as well.
Yeah, Gary, I want to just mention, I don't want people to leave watching this conversation thinking that Shen has a decision to make, either go with all SROs or none, and that's it. All eggs in one basket. We had a meeting last week of the SAVE committee. Since we had met with the multiple agencies, our staff have been, and our architects have been involved in looking at what are the things that we can do to, and I hate to use that word, but to harden our facility, compartmentalize spaces, make sure we've got extra protection at doors, tie in the digital systems to our locking. There's a lot that's going on that we will talk about, and there's a lot that we probably won't talk about as well from the issue of security. But I think this is an appropriate level of complement to what we're doing. And I think, Oliver, if we ask you the question, if if 900,000 dropped in out of the air, would you say put it all in resource officers? And my guess is you would say no. With what the other expenditures that we're making, what we're doing in the Smart Bond program, and the vulnerability assessments. And that's the other thing. We're going to gain a lot by having the SRO people here. They're not just going to be standing at the door, hand on gun. They're going to be part of our team, looking at our facilities, figuring out where our vulnerabilities are. And I think one of the things we've identified from day one is we've got to follow all those policies, Bob, all those protocols. We've got to follow those protocols. And I think today people understand more than ever that you have to follow those. Yes. And so it is all those other things. Yeah. There's a lot of them.
And actually, I did want to say that because that response time is such a key, that slowing the individual down and keeping them out of the building as long as possible is very, very important. It takes 2 to 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes, depending. The average response time has come down, and our response time will be much lower. But nonetheless, if somebody gets in the building, they will do damage until they are confronted. So we have to keep them out as long as possible so that the response is there by the time they can get into the building, if possible, and certainly minimize it.
So, Vanessa, you were right. I jinxed this meeting by saying this looks like a relatively short agenda. She said you made a mistake. You should not have said that.
So it's your fault?
And
Okay.
Vanessa, you are right.
This will not happen.
So,
I will
yeah.
say, I'm just
So,
saying,
yeah.
as a comment though, this was a lot of information.
This can't happen.
This was a lot of information. I mean, those presentations are so informative and they're so important, and these guys have been here all day, I mean, this is a long night.
They'll feel
And,
sympathetic for
No,
them,
I
please.
do feel sympathetic because what they put forth is a lot of effort, and I'm going to be perfectly honest. After a while, I'm like, this is too much, and I want to be able to offer a positive, and I want to be able to be involved. It comes to a point, I'm like, whoa, I can't even take any more in.
Yeah. Well, it's
So,
the end of the year, and we're
maybe
doing some
further
wrap up.
discussion
Yeah,
on that.
yeah. Good luck in the future. I would
Yeah,
say.
right.
Thanks.
So I'd like, we'll move to action items. Could I have a motion to accept A, B, and C certifications of the vote, both for bus purchases, the budget, and the Board of Education members? Todd, motion, second. Naomi, all those in favor? Motion carries. And then lastly, we have a bond resolution to move forward with the financing for school buses and the plow and salt truck, and I have a motion on that. Christina, second. Bob, all those in favor? Motion carries. Right before we adjourn, I want to let, one thing I want to add on to our agenda. There is a special meeting, executive session of the Board of Education. It will be held at the district office at 7 o'clock on May 29th for the purpose of discussing employee discipline. And then our next regular business meeting is on June 5th here in this room at 7 o'clock. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Bob, second. Naomi. Oh, I should have called on you. All those in favor? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you, Gus.